Welcome to the ANOKHI Uncensored Show. I'm your host, Hina, and I'm thrilled to have Uzma Jalaluddin, the author of Hana Khan Carries On, as my special guest. Thank you, Uzma, for joining me today.
Oh, thank you so much. I'm really happy to be here.
Now, the reason why I brought you on, and for those of you who do watch and listen to the show, you probably recognize her name because I had her on earlier this year, actually, when your book came out. So this time around, I wanted you to be a part of the ANOKHI Advocate list, and this is to commemorate our 19th anniversary of ANOKHI. So again, thank you for being a part of this. I'm really excited to kind of get your perspective on what we're going to talk about, the whole idea of advocacy in literature.
Sounds good.
So like I said, first off, when we were together before, your book just came out, Hana Khan Carries On. Since then, you've had quite a lot of pretty amazing developments, one of them most notably having Mindy Kaling option your book to make it into a film. So tell me a bit about your reaction to that, and where are you now in that process?
Yeah, I'm really excited. And in fact, actually, when we spoke, I knew that my book had been optioned. So just to give you and your listeners a little bit of context, the way that IP projects, meaning that intellectual property is sort of optioned these days, oftentimes it happens very, very early on. So Hana Khan Carries On is a book that I wrote. I own the IP for it. And shortly after I had submitted the book to my editor with the final edits, I also gave it to my film agent, and his job is to sort of, see and shop it around and see if there would be any interest from any producers willing to turn it into a movie or a film or, a television show, miniseries, whatever the case may be. There's a big market for this type of thing, and we figured there'd be some interest because my first novel was also optioned. I Shot Last was optioned by Pascal Pictures way back in 2018.
That's right.
So this was the hardest secret to keep because it was actually, my book came out April 2021, but it was optioned way back in October, November 2020. And I just had to be quiet about it for about until almost 10 months later when the news was finally officially announced in August 2021. So not even when the book launched, and I just was sitting on this amazing news and I couldn't tell anyone. So I'm very good at keeping secrets, everyone. If you want to tell me.
You are. Oh my goodness.
No one will hear about it.
I am. Okay. Good to know. You are very good because when we had our interview, it was great, but that must have been bubbling inside of you just because it's such good news.
It was. And to your question, I was thrilled. I mean, I think I was walking around in a daze for a couple of days because Mindy Kaling is such an icon. She is such an inspiration to me personally. I'm also a huge fan of hers. Like I've been watching her kind of develop and grow as an artist, and now is like this badass producer. Yeah. She's running a very successful company, Kaling International. And I love everything that she does. I really feel like, strangely, I guess our tastes sort of align. And we did end up having a Zoom meeting. So I met her virtually, which was fantastic. She's lovely. And she said that You've Got Mail, the original iteration of the movie that my novel was based on, is her favorite movie. It's one of her favorite rom-com movies of all time. So this was written in the stars. It was meant to be. Absolutely. I obviously didn't know that when I was writing my book way back in 2017, but I'm beyond thrilled.
Oh, that's so exciting. So everyone, please keep an eye out for Mindy Kaling's film, which is based on Uzma's book, Hana Khan Carries On. Do you know when it's coming out? Do you have that info yet or no?
No, the way this works is it's a very long process. It will take years. Things get optioned, and the very first step is they've actually done the first step. They have hired a screenwriter, and she'll be working on that process, and that could take a year or even longer.
Yeah. Exactly.
So it's exciting, but don't hold your breath. It'll take a while.
Well, we'll be all keeping an eye out for that. So when I had you on, the reason why we brought you on the show was to talk about representation in literature. And that brings me to today's show, talking about advocacy. So my first question for you is, what does advocacy mean to you?
I always somehow associate it with the political realm, and I know I shouldn't, because even my other job is I'm a high school teacher, and we always tell our students, it's really important for you to advocate for yourself, to make sure that you speak up, speak out if you need any accommodations or something is bothering you, or things like that. And yet somehow I still associate it with a very political process. And yet, as I have sort of joined this artistic life, and I've delved more deeply into my own artistic aspirations, I've realized that advocacy can take so many different forms. And even the stories that I write, simply by writing a book about Muslims with a mostly Muslim cast, a mostly brown cast, who are sort of living their own life, but also dealing with the sort of issues that I tend to write about in my novels. Both my books deal with quite, very prominent ideas of race, class, identity, religion, and things like that. I feel like, as a person who is a visible Muslim, the advocacy that I do is almost so deeply ingrained in who I am that it comes out in ways that I don't even see as advocacy, and yet that is what it is.
And why is advocacy important to you?
Well, I think, coming back to my previous point, I don't really see it as advocacy. I see it as living my life. And yet other people who are not used to people like me taking up space in their world see it as me pushing back against the norms that they have always accepted and expected in their life. So when I write books that are centering brown Muslim characters, and these brown Muslim characters, for instance, do not, basically give up everything about their culture and their faith and completely, subsume themselves and sublimate themselves into the wider white context in which they live. That's not me being an advocate. That's just me writing a kind of perspective that most people have never seen before. And yet, to readers who are completely new to this, they might see it as like, oh, you're advocating for your culture and your faith. And like, no, I'm just writing about people's lives that have traditionally been very much ignored on the page and screen.
But when you're writing about these characters that are not traditionally found in these type of books, aside from being tokenized as a side character, but you bring them right to the forefront, even though you're writing what you know, and you're not deliberately advocating, you're writing what you know. But at the end of the day, it does come, it has such a magic of advocacy to it, because as a Muslim woman myself, when I'm reading your book, for me, I'm like, I'm so glad she wrote this book, because now other people can see who we are and how we live our lives, and that, yes, we are just like them. So there isn't that othering that is happening to us. So, do you see where I'm coming from? Because I view that as, even though you deliberately didn't set on to doing it, it is an advocacy action.
And I think that's the magic of a representation, really, right? It's like, just by writing my truth, writing my own authentic lived experience, other people will benefit from it in all of these myriad ways. I get emails, DMs on Instagram and other social media from readers all the time, and they're always a joy to read. It takes me a while to respond. Sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. But I got this beautiful letter from a Muslim woman an Arab Muslim woman who's living in France, and she's probably 5th generation. So her ancestry is Arab, and she wears hijab. And she basically was saying, she read my book, which unfortunately is not translated in French. So she read it in English, and she's never seen herself represented on the page like this. And so, and she just was kind of sharing some of the hardships and the extreme Islamophobia that she's had to face, like removing her hijab every day before going into school, because that was an important part of her identity that was really, just not really accepted in the public school system there, and all of these other types of things. And she, it just gave me chills. I was thinking, I wrote this book, sitting in my office a couple of years ago, and yet it's somehow the magic of the spoken word, the magic of the printed word has reached across an ocean and is touching this person's life. And she feels so connected to me in a way. And so I think the advocacy work that you're referring to, it's so important to reach out to others, but it's also really important to reach out within our own communities and kind of like, let's hold hands and realize that we're going through very similar struggles. And one of the things that I try to do when I write is keep my audience in mind. I'm not writing necessarily for the white gaze. I'm writing for my people. And I hope that is a, big tent, my people, and trying to be as inclusive as possible, but I have a specific audience in mind.
You've kind of answered this already, but I'm just going to say, because here you talk about the importance. So like, I'm going to ask you, can you share with me and our audience why it's so important for people to incorporate a sense of advocacy into their lives? It could be personal, it could be professional, it could be spiritual. Can you expand on that importance of bringing it into their own lives?
Because I think the world is unjust, and it's important that we as people stand up to injustice. There's a Muslim saying, if you see something wrong, you should do something, you should try to change it with your hand, or you should try to change it with your tongue, meaning you speak out against it. And if you can't do that because you don't have the power or you're not in the right headspace, you should hate it in your heart. And I always thought that was a beautiful Islamic Muslim hadith, because it's acknowledging the fact that sometimes you can do things to change, and other times all you can do is speak out against it, even if it doesn't have as much impact. And other times you're so powerless, or you yourself are so weak for a variety of reasons, that all you can do is hate it in your heart, but at least you know what's right and what's wrong. And so I think advocacy can take on that tinge. You have to figure it out for yourself, but closing your mind to the injustices that exist in the world, I think, makes you someone who's not as compassionate and empathetic to other people. I never want to be that person. People always ask me, why are you still teaching high school? I'm a public high school teacher in the GTA. And it's not just because I need to get out of the house or I'll go crazy, but it's also because I feel a real tangible benefit to my job for society. I'm doing something that's good for not just through writing books, but also through, the act of teaching.
So let's talk about the act of teaching, because we have to recognize that as well, what you do. So tell me, how has advocacy, been a part of your students' lives? Like, are you seeing them kind of understand and become more aware of it than before?
High school is a really weird time of life, right? And what I've really realized, both as a mother, I have 2 teenage boys at home with me. They're amazing. I love them. And then I teach, I've taught hundreds of kids, maybe thousands of kids. I've been teaching for almost 20 years. And it depends. Like, some kids, I know for myself, I think I was a late bloomer. I think I was someone who really sort of came into my own and thought about the world in my 20s. And some kids I see are very much, and we have to remember, we have to acknowledge we're coming out of a pandemic. So I do feel like the kids right now have experienced something that is shaking up adults, leave alone children. But some kids are very much consumed with themselves. So they're very, your typical kind of very self-absorbed, just thinking about their own selves. But there are a lot of kids who have their eyes wide open to the world. And whether it's through personal experience, I work in a community that is very, very diverse. So most of my students are either immigrants themselves, or they're the children of immigrants. They know, and because they hear from home, the stories about what's happening in other countries. And so they have a very global perspective of the world. Some of them are activists already. Some of them are extremely well read. Others lie to me and never have read a book in years, probably. They're English teachers, so they're like, yeah, we like to read, Instagram posts. But we have to have space for all of these kids. Everyone's on a journey. Everyone is different. And, the person that you are in grade 9 will be very different, hopefully, than the person that you are in grade 12. And it's so wonderful to me, because sometimes I teach the same kids in grade 9, like the batch that I'm teaching in grade 12, I taught them in grade 9. And now I'm teaching about half the class. They're like, oh, Mr. Jalaluddin, yeah, we taught you, you taught us in grade 12. And they're different. In grade 9, there was no COVID. I taught them in first semester 2019 and September 2019. And we kind of, spent some time together for 5 months. And now here we are in September 2021, and the world is a different place. They've changed. I've changed. It's just, I don't know. I think I'm one of those people that, marking is never fun. Sometimes you have kids who are really challenging. But I always feel like the importance of education, of an educator, and the thing that I think I bring to the table, which is tied up in this idea of advocacy, is empathy and compassion. That's what you have to bring to the classroom every day.
How have your kids changed from then and now? The pandemic, obviously.
My own children?
No, the children you're teaching, how you've noticed that they've changed and you've changed. How have they changed?
Well, they've changed because I think there's a sense of wariness, wary and weary. They're tired of it. They're cautious about the world. I think there's a sense of trust that has been, shaken at an earlier age than usually happens. They've seen systems fail them. Many of them have family in other countries, such as India. They've seen grandparents and aunts and uncles die, or in China. And there's a huge mental health crisis, right? Just across the board in society. I think people are talking about it a lot more, but we're very worried for our students as well. And I can see that. Like, I have a couple of kids, and as someone who interacts with young people every day, this is something that you just keep an eye out, and just like, okay, you need to talk to someone. Let me try to find you the resources, right? We're supposed to be another caring adult in their life. And I have big classes. I have 30 kids in my class, 27 kids in my class. Some of them are online. Some of them are in person. Teaching is crazy right now. But that's sort of one of the roles that we can play, while also delivering curriculum, of course. I'm still their English teacher. They still have to write an essay.
Exactly. That's true. That essay will always be due. There's no excuses.
Still do. Yeah.
Still do. Now, talking about advocacy here, in the last year specifically, so obviously the pandemic, what have you seen that has stood out and how our world is changing to meet people where they're at, rather than conditioning and fitting into preconceived ideologies?
I think this idea that we all have everything put together has just been cracked wide open. And we're just more used to seeing the messiness of everyday life. And we see this in so many ways. Like, look, we're having this interview virtually. You can see into my office, right? And I am like trying to grab my bag of Reese peanut butter cups that I keep in the corner away from everybody. And then just that ability to see inside everyone's houses and see how, people have their kids crawling all over them, or their cats kind of wandering through Zoom. Just that there's an intimacy there that simply wasn't there before, when we were all kind of well dressed and presenting our our perfect faces, and now everyone is in each other's homes all the time.
Yeah.
So I think that has done something to help people, and also I think just the understanding of more, what are the realities that people are facing at home. They call this this has triggered a she session, right? So we know that it's impacted women, marginalized communities way more than it has others, simply because we really see the difference of okay, you're a working woman, but have you been able to afford things like childcare or elder care? And now that those things have changed because of COVID protocols, what does your life now look like, and who's taking on that burden of labor? Sorry, I don't know if I'm answering your question, but
no. I get you. But now, one thing which I do want to talk to you about is slacktivism, because slacktivism has become a thing. For those who may not be familiar with it, slacktivism is the notion that by creating or tweeting a hashtag is also effective, giving the person the idea that they're contributing to the cause by sharing the hashtag. In your view, what are the pros and cons of slacktivism?
This is such a great question. I remember reading it and thinking immediately of the black square on Instagram,
Yeah.
That's
right.
The example about for the Black Lives Matter protest.
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm mixed. I mean, I don't want to come across as judgmental, and I also don't want to come across as not having expectations for myself and for others. I always look to myself first, and I think that outside of my writing, I don't know how much I don't consider myself an activist necessarily. I have a certain way that I view the world, and that is shaped by my family, my culture, the privileges that I've been afforded, the fact that I live in a country where I can speak my actual opinion without fear of repercussions. I work in a very protected industry. I'm a unionized employee. And so I don't want to come down too hard on people who might not see the world in the same way that I do. And even if they do, they share some of my same political viewpoints, and, the way that they express that is through things like the, changing your Instagram picture to a black square or to a green square or to whatever that is. Mm-hmm. I admire people who start those movements because I know some of them. I know someone who, started like the green square movement and made, we've all heard of like the hashtag Me Too, that particular hashtag, or all the other hashtags that kind of have gained steam, like hashtag Oscar So White, and there's so many of them. Hashtag We Need Diverse Books is one that that impacts me personally. And ultimately, I think what it does, slacktivism, what slacktivism does is it's trying to harness the power of the many, right? So, and what that does is that it's removing, and it's the same thing that we were talking about earlier, the veneer that news has to be filtered, and updates on what life is actually like on the ground for people has to be filtered through mainstream media, which is an extremely important part of life. Like I myself, I'm a columnist for the Toronto Star, so I believe in media, but that's not the only way that people get their news. And so we see what it's like on the ground. For instance, when India was experiencing that COVID crisis, they're still experiencing it, but we actually got live on the ground coverage. I'm saying India because my background is Indian. And I had family who were like posting updates. I'm like, okay, this is where you can find oxygen containers in this hospital in Delhi and this, and it was just heartbreaking, absolutely horrifying to realize what my own cousins and my aunts and uncles are experiencing in India, right? It's just, it was just completely traumatic. And to get it from that point of view, as opposed to the filtered sort of CNN broadcast of what's happening on the ground, is completely different. So how I think that filters into this idea of slacktivism is it's a hashtag, yes, but some of these hashtags are really effective in causing change. And I think hashtag Me Too is an example of that. So we, as maybe like, this is just not my demographic, maybe I'm just too old for this. I don't know. I'm not 20 or 15. But I remember as a youngster going to like, as a 20-year-old, going to like protests downtown, and just showing up. And I don't do that anymore. And maybe this is, and maybe those protests had absolutely no impact. Certainly maybe it's not a tangible impact. And yet the, hashtag changing your Instagram, et cetera, it might be the only time that this person, whoever it is, a young person, an old person, medium-aged person, like me, might be thinking about these really deep social justice issues. So I don't know. I understand the criticism that it is based in posturing, in its ineffective, the criticism that it is simply virtue signaling for your base about how you feel about certain things. I get that. But, I think ultimately I'm an optimist, and I hope that in some cases it might lead to actual change.
Excellent. That's an awesome answer, Uzma. It was really, really good. Now, my last question here is, and obviously with your students too, and I think you kind of touched on this a little bit earlier. With what you've seen, experienced, what advice would you give to everyone who's watching, listening, and reading this, who want to be more proactive in a cause that they believe in, to actually get up and action it?
I would go back to the hadith that I mentioned earlier. So that Islamic saying, if you feel like there's an injustice being done, try to change it with your hand, try to speak out against it with your tongue, and if you can't do that, hate it in your heart. And I think, even though it's like, it's one of those, like as a writer, I'm like, that's a classically written type of suggestion, because it's in climactic order, right? And I don't think people realize that it is climactic order. Climactic order means that it's rising, right? But most people think if you change it with your hand, that's the most important and powerful thing. If you change it with your tongue, that's the second one. If you hate something in your heart, that's the weakest of faith. And that's actually how the hadith goes. But I actually think that's where it starts. You have to hate this injustice in your heart that you see. Nothing else really tangible will come out of it unless you really want change in your heart. And I would caution people to pace themselves as well, because it's really, really common for people to burn out when they do this kind of advocacy work.
Yeah, that's so important.
It's a huge problem. And you see that one or two people it seems like they're taking on the burden of the world, and you can't do that. you won't last. You'll last maybe a couple of years, and then you'll be so burned out you won't be able to do anything. But changing the world is a lifelong process. Nothing is going to change overnight. I work in a huge bureaucracy. Any school board it's like the school board I work for is like the largest employer where I live. And changing a huge machine like that, changing a government, changing even within a corporate structure, it takes time. And I think sometimes as young people, they want to advocate for change right away, which I love. I love that they want that, because you need the young people to rattle the cages. Yeah. But you want to make sure that you stay there and you keep rattling those cages with the understanding that it'll take time, but things have the potential to change. Now, I mean, COP26 is happening right now, right? The climate change conference in Glasgow. And it's so hard for me to not be cynical about it, because we've all seen this before, right? Like this is not our first go around on this merry-go-round. Oh, the planet is burning. We're all in crisis. Okay, but we'll change it by 2050. 2050? What the heck? you know? So,
I know.
I think you have to temper your need to change things immediately, with the acknowledgement that the world must move slowly. It's actually an important part of change to go slow, because that's when you have the most thoughtful change that happens. And slow doesn't mean that we're going to wait 30 years for something, maybe a year or two, and I just think about the way that social attitudes have changed about so many things. For instance, the LGBTQ movement has made leaps and strides in the way that we talk about that community and the way that we are become so much more accepting of that community. Mm-hmm. And that's one example, I think, that has come a long way, which is great.
Wonderful. And our time is coming to a close. Thank you so much, Uzma. Thank you for sharing your perspective with our global audience. And congratulations again on being part of the ANOKHI Advocate List. Thank you, Uzma.
Thank you so much.